The room was cold and quiet. It always was. The Galactic Council chamber sat at the center of a massive station orbiting a dim star called Veyun 9, far from any planet anyone lived on. That was the point. No home, no noise, no distractions, just decisions. Tonight, a very important decision was being made. Elder Vrosh stood at the center of the chamber. He was tall, gray-skinned, and very old. His species, the Delvari, had been part of the council for over 400 years. He had seen civilizations rise. He had seen them fall. And he believed, deeply and completely, that he knew the difference between a species that could be trusted and one that could not. He believed humanity was the second kind. "The data is clear," he said, his voice calm and flat. "The humans are advancing too fast. Their weapons technology has grown by 300% in 40 years. Their population control is non-existent. Their history is one long record of war, exploitation, and destruction. We have watched and waited. Waiting is no longer responsible." Around him, representatives from 47 species sat in tiered seats that curved like a bowl. Some of them nodded. Some looked uncomfortable. A few looked angry. One of them, a small blue-gray figure from the Sorvani people named Tail, stared at his desk. He had read the proposal 3 times. Resolution 7-Omega. The words were clean and formal on paper. What they described was not clean at all. "You are talking about killing an entire species," said the Fenari delegate, her voice sharp, "before they have done anything to us." "They will," Vrosh said simply. "Every model confirms it, every projection. The only question is whether we act before or after they develop fold space drives. If we act after, we may not be able to act at all." The debate went on for 2 hours. It was polite. It was structured. It was horrifying in how normal it sounded. Words like threat mitigation and preemptive stabilization were used often. The word killing was not used at all. In the end, the vote was called. 31 species voted yes, 16 voted no. The resolution passed. Tail did not vote yes. He sat very still after the result was announced. He watched Elder Vrosh accept the outcome with a small, satisfied nod. He watched the chamber begin to empty. Then he reached under his desk and picked up a small silver data shard he had prepared 3 days ago and put it in his coat pocket. He stood up, walked to the exit at a normal speed, and did not look back. He had a transit pod to catch. On the other side of the galaxy, it was late at night in Seoul. Yuna had been working for 11 hours. She was the head of intelligence at the UN Deep Space Listening Array, a facility buried 2 levels underground in a quiet part of the city. Most people who lived above it had no idea it was there. That was also the point. She was drinking cold coffee and reading through signal data when she noticed something wrong. The alien comm traffic had gone silent. Not quiet, not reduced. Silent. Every monitored channel, every known frequency used by the species the Council had contact with, all of it. Nothing. She checked her instruments. She ran a diagnostic. She checked again. Nothing. Yuna had been doing this job for 9 years, and she knew what normal silence looked like. This was not normal silence. Normal silence had texture to it. Small background pulses, relay echoes, automated signals from navigation beacons. What she was seeing now was the silence of something that had been turned off on purpose. She pulled up a partial signal fragment she had caught 40 minutes ago. It had come in on a frequency they rarely monitored, lasted less than 2 seconds, and her system had flagged it as noise. She ran it through the decoder again, this time at a higher sensitivity. The result came back with 3 words. Clearance confirmed. No witnesses. Yuna stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called the one person she was supposed to call in a situation like this. Junho picked up on the second ring. He was not asleep. He was never really asleep anymore. He was a large, or quiet man, with close-cut gray hair, and the kind of stillness that came from spending decades making decisions that cost lives. He had commanded armies. He had negotiated peace treaties. He was now the UN Joint Defense Commander, which meant he was responsible for the safety of every person on the planet. He listened to Yuna without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "Send me everything," he said. "All of it." "Already did," she said. "Junho, if I'm reading this right..." "You're reading it right," he said. "Go home." "No, don't go home. Stay at your station. I need you there." He ended the call and stood at the window of his office. Seoul was spread out below him, lit up and moving, full of people who were eating dinner and watching television and putting their children to bed. He looked at them for a moment. Then he picked up a second phone, the one with no network logs, and began making calls. No public announcements. Test runs. 11 years of secret test runs. 11 years of secret construction, disguised as asteroid deflection research. Tonight, it would mean something different. Junho stood at the window for a long time after the calls were done. The city looked the same. The sky looked the same. Then, very slowly, a line of lights appeared in the upper atmosphere, moving in a straight, even formation from west to east. They were the right shape to be a meteor shower. They were the wrong shape to be anything natural at all. Junho watched them move across the sky. He had known for 3 hours. He had been hoping, in a small and tired part of himself, that he was wrong. He was not wrong. He turned away from the window and went to work. The attack started at 4:17 in the morning, UTC. 42 Council warships came out of fold space at the same time, appearing above Earth like dark holes punched into the sky. They were enormous. Each one was longer than a city block, angular and gray, with no lights on the outside. They didn't need lights. They weren't there to be seen coming. They were there to end things quickly. The plan, as Elder Vrosh had designed it, was simple. Show up in full force above every major population center. Let the humans see the size of the fleet. Wait 6 hours for global governments to surrender. If surrender didn't come, begin surface bombardment of military infrastructure only. Civilian casualties were expected to remain below 12% in the first wave. It was a very clean plan. It assumed the humans would behave the way every other species had behaved when the Council showed up with 42 warships. Junho had not read the plan, but he had guessed most of it. Those 3 hours he had used to prepare were not wasted. The moment the first Council ship appeared on radar, in every orbital defense platform Earth had quietly powered up and locked on. They were not impressive weapons by galactic standards. They were large, slow, and built from technology that the Council would have called primitive. But they were real. They were armed. And they were already pointed at the right targets. The Council commanders had expected empty sky. They got gun barrels instead. The first exchange lasted 9 minutes. The Earth's platforms fired wide-beam energy disruptors, salvaged alien tech from a crashed survey ship found in the Pacific 17 years ago, reverse-engineered and scaled up. 3 Council ships took direct hits. None were destroyed, but all 3 lost weapon systems temporarily and pulled back from their positions. In the Council flagship, the senior commander, a Delvari officer named in their records only by rank, stared at his display screen for a long moment and said nothing. His staff waited. "Rerun the threat assessment," he said finally. The assessment came back the same as before. Minimal resistance expected. He looked at his burning ships on the screen. Then he ordered a second wave. Minho had been awake for 22 hours when the scramble order came through. He was a wing commander, 34 years old, and one of the best pilots Earth had. And he knew this not because he was arrogant, but because everyone kept telling him, and the data kept confirming it. He flew experimental atmospheric craft, wedge-shaped, fast, and built for angles of attack that older jets could not manage. His squadron had trained on them for 2 years. They had never flown them in actual combat. Today was the first time. He led 12 fighters up through the lower atmosphere above the Pacific Ocean, heading for a formation of Delvari strike craft that had broken away from the main fleet and were descending toward a coastal defense installation. The alien ships were smaller than the warships, fast-moving, and shaped like long needles. They moved in groups of 3, which meant Minho's 12 planes were going into a fight against roughly 30 enemy craft. He had been told this. He had said, okay. The first 10 minutes were the worst 10 minutes of his life. The alien ships were faster in a straight line. They had better targeting systems. They communicated with each other in ways his radar couldn't track, so they coordinated without warning. He lost 4 pilots in those first 10 minutes. 4 people he had trained with, eaten meals with, argued with about music and football scores. Gone in seconds. But he noticed something. They were fast in a straight line. They were not as fast in a turn. When he pushed his craft into a sharp angle and came at them from below at high speed, they adjusted slower than he expected. He called it out over comms. His surviving pilots heard him. They changed tactics on the spot. By the end of the engagement, his squadron had shot down 9 enemy craft. They had lost 4 of their own. Minho landed with shaking hands and a quiet, cold anger that sat in his chest like a stone. He climbed out of his cockpit and immediately started writing notes for the next flight. In Busan, Nari was standing on a rooftop. She was a journalist, had been for 12 years, and she had covered floods and wars and political disasters on 4 continents. She had never covered anything like this. Nobody had. She had her camera running and her live feed active, and she was talking in a clear, steady voice about what she was seeing. The lights in the sky, and the distant sounds of detonations over the ocean, the thin trails of smoke where something had fallen from orbit and burned up on the way down. She did not know, at that moment, that her feed was being intercepted. Tail had reached a neutral relay station at the edge of council space. He had plugged his data shard into the station's broadcast system, which was technically illegal under 4 separate council regulations. He didn't care. He found Nari's live signal, boosted it through the relay network, and pushed it out on every open frequency he could access. 216 species received the broadcast within the hour. Most of them had never seen a human being before. What they saw was a woman standing on a rooftop in the dark, speaking calmly while the sky above her was full of alien warships. She was not crying. She was not begging. She was describing what she saw with the exact same voice she would use to describe a weather pattern, and many of them found this deeply unusual. Junho's global broadcast came 90 minutes into the attack. It was not long. He stood in front of a camera in a plain gray room and spoke without notes. "We know why you came," he said. "We know who gave the order. We have the evidence, and we are not done." He turned off the camera and went back to his screens. In the council flagship, the senior commander received a damage report, read it twice, and sent a message back to the council. The message contained 4 words that had never appeared together in any report filed in connection with Resolution 7 Omega: resistance greater than modeled. In the council chamber, someone read the message out loud. A long silence followed. Then someone quietly asked how long the humans were expected to last. No one answered. That was the part that bothered people most. Not the question, but the silence where the answer was supposed to be. By the end of the third day, Earth had taken serious damage. 14 coastal installations were offline. 2 orbital platforms had been destroyed. Power grids across parts of Europe and Southeast Asia were running on backup systems. Field hospitals had been set up in schools and community centers. Food and water distribution was being managed by the military in 7 countries. The casualty numbers were real and they were painful, and Junho read every report that came across his desk. He read them, and then he kept working, because the Council fleet had also taken damage. More damage, in fact, than their own models had said was possible at this stage. Their projection had put Earth's military resistance at roughly 36 hours before full collapse. They were now on hour 72. The fleet had lost 11 ships, not disabled, not retreating, gone. Earth's orbital platforms and Minho's growing network of atmospheric fighter wings had accounted for most of them. And the Council commanders had expected a quick, clean operation. What they had gotten instead was a planet that seemed to get more creative and more dangerous the longer the fight went on. The change that mattered most came from a basement in Switzerland. Hein had not slept in 40 hours. She was the lead weapons engineer on what the UN called Project Anchor, which had been the official name for the secret orbital defense program. She was brilliant in the way that very few people are, not just smart, but able to look at something broken or unfamiliar and immediately understand what it was trying to do and how to make it do something else. 3 days into the attack, a Delvari strike craft had been brought down, mostly intact in a field outside Lyon, France. It had been recovered and flown to her facility within 6 hours. She had taken it apart in 12. What she found inside the drive system was a flaw. Not a design flaw exactly. More like a constraint. The fold space drives that the Council ships used to travel between stars worked by generating a specific resonance frequency in the fabric of local space. They were carefully calibrated. If that frequency was disrupted by an external matching signal, the drive would not fail gradually. It would collapse all at once. She built an emitter from salvaged components, a repurposed particle accelerator array, and a cooling system she pulled from an industrial refrigeration unit in a food storage facility nearby. It was ugly. It barely fit in the room. She ran 3 tests, and it nearly melted twice. On the 4th test, she pointed it at 3 Council warships in low orbit and fired. All 3 ships came apart at the same time. Hein watched it on her monitor screen, standing very still. One of her assistants made a noise that was not quite a word. She wrote down the frequency settings that had worked, circled the number twice, and said, "Again, let's build 3 more." While Hein was working in Switzerland, Yuna was working in Seoul. She had maintained contact with Tail through the neutral relay station, communicating in short, encrypted bursts that were hard to trace. He had been sending her pieces of the full resolution 7 Omega file in small sections to avoid triggering the Council's monitoring systems. By the 3rd day, she had all of it. She read through it carefully, twice. Then she read the internal memo at the end, a note written by Elder Vrosh himself, attached to the resolution before the vote. It was not written in the careful political language of the rest of the document. It was direct and personal and clearly meant only for Council members. It said, "Humanity must not be allowed to reach the stars. Not because they are weak, because they are not." Yuna sat with that sentence for a long time. Then she forwarded the complete file to Junho and to Suho, the Secretary General of the United Earth Assembly, along with a single line of her own. They knew exactly what they were doing. Here is the proof. Suho was not a military man. He had been a diplomat for 30 years and a politician for 10 years before that. He was careful with words, slow to speak, and very hard to surprise. He read the file in his office with 2 of his senior advisors present. When he finished, he set the document down and asked his advisors to leave the room. He sat alone for a while. Then he called his communications team and told them to prepare a broadcast. He did not raise his voice once during the broadcast. He read the key sections of the resolution clearly, translated into every major language simultaneously. He showed the vote count. He showed Vrosh's memo. He let the words speak for themselves. His own commentary was minimal. When he was done, he simply said, "The people of Earth did not start this. We will finish it." He turned off the camera. Nari's continued broadcasts, now reaching over 200 species through Tail's relay work, had already made the attack visible to the galaxy. Suho's broadcast made the reason for the attack visible too. The effect was significant. Several neutral civilizations that had been staying quiet began making very loud public statements demanding that the Council explain itself. The 16 species that had voted against Resolution 7 Omega began moving procedural motions inside the Council to suspend the operation. And in the Council chamber, the second vote on sending reinforcements was called. Elder Vrosh argued for it. He was calm and logical and presented his data carefully. The vote passed by 24 to 23. A month ago, it had been 31 to 16. Elder Vrosh looked at the result and understood what the number meant, and he said nothing and showed nothing on his face. But he understood. Meanwhile, Minho had developed new attack patterns, sharp gravity-assisted runs that pulled his fighters into fast descending arcs that the alien strike craft couldn't track quickly enough. He had also started training new pilots on a rolling basis, pulling anyone with simulator hours and enough nerve, cycling them through live combat experience as fast as he could. His losses were real. Every day he knew someone who was not coming back. But every day, the number of Council ships in the sky was also smaller. Hein looked at her instruments late that night. 39 warships remaining in Earth orbit. She thought about the 3 that had come apart above Europe that afternoon. She wiped the grease off her hands, sat down, and started drawing the schematics for the next emitter. 0 was a better number than 39. She intended to get there. On the 8th day, Ingenio made a decision that no Earth commander had ever made before. He stopped defending. He attacked. It was not a decision he made lightly. He had spent the previous 2 days going over every piece of data Yuna had pulled from Tail's file. Fleet positions, communication patterns, the fold space coordinates the Council ships used to stay in formation. It was detailed information. Tail had been careful and thorough. Junho studied it the way he had studied every battlefield in his career, looking for the place where the enemy was most confident, because that was almost always the place where they were least careful. The Council flagship sat at the center of the fleet's formation, approximately 40,000 kilometers above the equator. It was the largest ship, 3 times the size of any other vessel in the fleet, and it was the most heavily shielded. The Council commanders had positioned it there deliberately. It was out of range of Earth's ground-based weapons. It was surrounded by escort ships on all sides. It was, by design, untouchable. Junho decided to touch it anyway. The plan had 3 parts. First, Hein's resonance emitters, she had 4 operational now, would fire simultaneously at the escort ships nearest to the flagship, creating a gap in the defensive ring. Second, Minho's fighter wings would push through that gap and hit the flagship's external weapon systems directly, stripping its ability to fire back. Third, our Earth's remaining orbital platforms would take a coordinated shot using a weapon that had not been used yet: the mass driver. It was the oldest and simplest weapon on Earth's list. At its core, it was just a very large electromagnetic rail mounted on the largest orbital platform, originally designed to hurl payloads at incoming asteroids and redirect them. It could accelerate a solid metal projectile to 0.3% the speed of light. It had no guidance system beyond the initial aim. Once fired, the projectile could not be recalled, adjusted, or stopped. It was not a precision weapon. It was a statement. Yuna spent 14 hours calculating the exact shot. She had to account for the flagship's movement, the gravitational influence of the moon, the rotation of the platform, and the distance. She ran the calculation 60 times. Each time the answer was close, but not the same. She chose the result that appeared most often and forwarded it to Junho with a note that said, "This is as good as it gets. Your call." Junho looked at the number. Then he authorized the operation. The attack began at dawn, local time over the Pacific. The 4 resonance emitters fired together. 3 escort ships folded themselves apart instantly. A 4th lost all power and went dark, drifting sideways out of formation. The gap in the escort ring was roughly 8 seconds wide before the other ships began to close it. 8 seconds was enough. Minho led the strike himself. He had 19 fighters going in, and he knew not all of them were coming back. He had not told his pilots this because they already knew. He pushed his craft through the gap at maximum speed, angling in a steep descending arc toward the flagship's upper weapons array. Enemy strike craft came at them from 3 directions. It was loud and fast, and for the first 2 minutes it was very nearly a disaster. He lost 6 planes getting to the flagship, but he got there. His remaining 13 fighters hit the weapons array in a single coordinated pass, firing everything they had in one concentrated burst. The array exploded in a long line of secondary detonations, each one triggering the next, stripping the flagship's upper half completely bare. The flagship returned fire from its lower systems. Minho's craft took a direct hit, losing his right engine and half his control surfaces. He managed to keep the plane level by sheer experience, pulling it into a wide, flat glide. His co-pilot, a young woman who had been flying combat missions for only 5 days, was killed by the blast. Minho flew the plane back to base with one engine and both hands steady on the controls. He did not speak on the comm channel for the entire return flight. The orbital platforms had been watching all of this on their targeting systems. The moment the flagship's weapons were confirmed down, Junho said one word to the platform operator. "Fire." The mass driver made almost no noise. The platform shuddered slightly, like a door closing too hard. The projectile, a solid tungsten rod 2 meters long, crossed 40,000 kilometers in just over 30 seconds. It did not destroy the flagship. It was never meant to. It hit the drive section at the rear of the ship with the force of a small volcanic eruption. The drives failed completely. The hull cracked in 6 places at once. Internal atmosphere vented out in long white jets that looked from a distance like the ship was breathing out. Every system on the flagship went dark at the same time. The ship began a slow, uncontrolled drift, pulled gradually toward Earth's atmosphere by gravity. The Council commander inside the ship had time, in the chaos, to send one message on all frequencies. The message was picked up by Yuna at her station in Seoul. She read it, and then called Junho without saying anything. She simply transferred the message to his screen. The message was short. It asked for terms of surrender. Junho read it once. Then he did something that surprised his entire staff. He did not reply. He forwarded the message directly to Suho, with nothing added. Tail had been watching the battle from a small screen at the relay station. He was the only non-human in the building. The station staff around him had not spoken to him since he arrived. They weren't unfriendly. They simply weren't sure what to make of a council aide who had defected to help the species his own government had just tried to kill. He watched the flagship go dark. He watched the white jets of atmosphere vent into space. He sat very still for a long time after the screen showed the ceasefire signals spreading through the fleet like a wave. One by one, the remaining council ships stopped firing and held their positions. He thought about the vote. 31-16. He thought about Elder Vrosh's memo. Not because they are weak, because they are not. The memo had been meant as a reason to destroy them. Tail had always thought it read more like a description of exactly why you shouldn't. Suho received Junho's forwarded message in his office. He read it carefully. He set it down on his desk. The room was quiet. Outside, he could hear people in the street below. Voices, movement, the city returning slowly and unevenly to something like normal. He asked his assistant to prepare a formal written response. "Make it polite," he said quietly. "We are going to be neighbors for a very long time." 6 months after the last council ship left Earth's orbit, the galaxy was still talking about it. Not in the quiet way that things get discussed in back rooms and private channels. In the loud, public, impossible to ignore way. The story was everywhere. The vote, the attack, the mass driver, the woman on the rooftop who didn't flinch, the 3 ships that had torn themselves apart above Europe. Every detail had been broadcast, analyzed, translated, and then passed from species to species until there was almost no one in the known galaxy who hadn't heard some version of it. And now there was a trial. It was held in a neutral station at the border of council space, overseen by a newly formed tribunal made up of 11 species, none of them Delvari, none of them from the 16 who had originally objected, and none of them from Earth. The goal was to make the process as fair as possible. What had happened was too serious to be handled by anyone with a direct stake in the outcome. Yuna was Earth's lead witness. She arrived at the station in a plain gray suit, carrying a data case with every piece of evidence she and Teal had assembled over the previous 6 months. The full resolution, the vote record, the internal communications, the original threat assessment documents, and Elder Vrosh's memo. She had organized the material with the same quiet precision she used at her listening station, and she presented it the same way, clearly, completely, and without drama. She did not raise her voice during her testimony. She did not need to. The tribunal asked her questions for 2 full days. She answered each one directly. When they showed her documents that the council's legal team tried to use to reframe the resolution as a defensive measure, she walked through the language line by line and showed why each claim was false. She was not unkind about it. She was simply thorough. By the end of the 2nd day, the council's legal team had stopped interrupting her. Elder Vrosh was present for all of it. He sat at his designated position and watched. His expression did not change much. He was a very old political creature, and he had spent centuries learning how to show nothing on his face. But on the 2nd day, when Yuna read his own memo aloud in the chamber, not because they are weak, because they are not, something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt, exactly. Something more like the recognition that a thing he had written in private was now part of the permanent record of history, and that it did not reflect well on him. The tribunal's ruling came 3 weeks later. Elder Vrosh was formally removed from his position and barred from council participation. 12 species faced official sanctions, with a structured process for reparations to Earth to be determined over the following 5 years. The Delvari were required to formally acknowledge Resolution 7 Omega in all official records, clearly labeled as what it was, an attempt at species extermination, not a defensive action. The day the ruling was announced, Nari was present in the chamber. She had been credentialed as a press representative. She recorded everything, as she always did. She did not editorialize. She did not need to. Tom. 1 week after the ruling, Suho stood before the full Galactic Assembly. The 16 species that had voted against the attack had formally proposed that Earth be admitted as a full member, not a monitored civilization, not a probationary state. A full sovereign voice, equal to any other in the chamber. The proposal had passed with enough support that the result was not really in doubt by the time the vote was called. 51 species voted in favor. 9 abstained. 3 objected, and Suho had watched the count with calm, patient eyes. His acceptance speech lasted 4 minutes. He thanked the species that had voted against the attack when it was politically difficult to do so. He acknowledged the cost to Earth and to the relationships between species that the war had damaged. He spoke briefly about what Earth intended to contribute to the assembly going forward in clear and practical terms. He said nothing about what had been done to them. He did not describe the damage or the losses or the hospitals that had been converted from schools. He didn't list the pilots who hadn't come back or the cities that were still being rebuilt. He had decided, in the weeks between the ruling and the speech, that those things did not belong in that room. They belonged to the people they had happened to. What he said, near the end, was this: "We came to the stars later than many of you. We arrive having already learned what it costs to be in a war with a neighbor. We do not intend to forget that." Several observers from neutral species noted afterward that the speech was, in its restraint, more unsettling to the guilty parties than anger would have been. Anger could be dismissed. 4 minutes of calm could not. Haiein's research team had grown to include 47 scientists from 3 species, and including several Sorvani engineers who had quietly reached out after the trial. They were working on the fold space drive problem from both directions, Earth's theoretical models, and the recovered Delvari technology, and the progress was faster than anyone had predicted. Hein spent most of her days in a workshop that smelled like burned wiring and cold coffee. She was happy. Minho returned to flight 2 months after the war. He had spent those 2 months doing very little. He had read books, walked along the Han River, and visited the families of the people he had lost. He had not talked much during that time. The people who knew him understood that this was how he processed things, and they left him alone. When he came back, he was assigned as the first human escort pilot for a diplomatic convoy leaving the solar system, a Sorvani vessel heading to a trade summit 3 star systems away. He flew in formation off its starboard side through the transit and back. And he found, somewhere in that long, quiet stretch of space, that he still loved flying more than anything else. He had been afraid, coming back, that the war would have taken that from him. It hadn't. Nari finished editing her documentary in a small apartment in Seoul. The final cut ran to 4 hours and 20 minutes and covered the entire war from the council vote to the tribunal ruling. She had footage from the rooftop in Busan, from Junho's emergency broadcasts, and from Minho's cockpit camera, from the relay station where Tail had watched the battle on a small screen alone. She had testimony from survivors on every continent. She had the moment the flagship went dark, captured from 3 different angles. She called it, "We Were Here." It was watched by an estimated 4 trillion beings across the galaxy in the first month of its release. Nari did not find this number easy to understand, and she thought about it sometimes when she was doing ordinary things, making tea, looking out a window, and it never quite became real to her. What was real was the work, the footage, the faces of the people she had filmed. Teal was granted asylum on Earth shortly after the trial. He chose to live on Jeju Island, on the southern coast, in a small house near the water. He said the sound of the ocean reminded him of something from his home planet. He couldn't explain it more specifically than that. Something in the rhythm of it. He had occasional nightmares about the vote. He had made his choice, and he did not regret it. But the memory of sitting in that chamber and watching 31 hands go up stayed with him in the way that certain things do. Not always painful, but always present. He was learning Korean. It was a difficult language for his speech apparatus. He was making slow and determined progress. And Junho, in his office late at night, was writing. Not reports, not strategy documents. A framework. The first draft of what would eventually become Earth's proposal for an interstellar mutual defense treaty, a structured agreement between willing species to maintain shared early warning systems, establish clear protocols for conflict resolution, and commit to transparency in military development. It was dense, careful work. It drew on 30 years of his own experience in international security, and it drew on everything he had learned in the past 6 months about how fast things could go wrong when there were no systems in place to catch them. He was not writing it because humanity was afraid. He was writing it because that was what responsible powers did. They built the structures that made the next war less likely. They did the slow, unglamorous work that didn't make documentaries or get remembered in history books the way battles did. He worked until close to midnight, then stopped and stood at his window. The city was lit up below him, same as always. And in the sky above it, moving in a slow and steady arc from west to east, were lights, human ships, the new generation, heading out past the moon, past the edge of the solar system, out into the dark. They had come to stop this from happening. They had voted and calculated and sent 42 warships to make sure humanity never reached those stars. Instead, and they had handed humanity every reason to run straight toward them. Junho watched the lights until they disappeared past the horizon. Then he turned around, sat down, and kept writing.